So let's go ahead and talk about these other tabs here. We didn't look at these yet with the outside tile set. We looked at them briefly with the world map one, but here we can see we have all sorts of other, on the B tab, we have all sorts of other types of things that we can place down. So we've got little trees and bushes, and there's rocks and barrels. So a lot of this you're going to use like in your towns and things, like signs, like you have an inn and a beer whatever, alcohol sign for like a tavern or whatever, and item shops and all sorts of things you can use. Windows for your buildings and doors and things. And then if you scroll down further, then you've got like larger trees we can use, and I'll show you how to use all these in a little bit here. We have like tents, and these are all things that are included with the game. That comes with the game. You can use all this stuff without having to go out of your way to get access to any of this. So you can spend a ton of time like making your areas look really nice and really detailed. But I'm just going to try to keep things kind of basic. Like, I want stuff to look pretty good, but not, I'm not going to spend 2 hours working on just one little tiny map here. And you saw on the left here, you can do them individually like we talked about before. So if you want to put a tree right here, you can click there, and you can click on this side, in this corner, and that corner, and then you've got a tree. So you can do it that way, but again, you can also click and drag, hold the mouse button down, and you can select the whole tree in one shot, and then it will be able to put the tree there in one time like that. So much easier doing it that way. So you have these here, and I'll just show you how this works. This is like a repeating pattern. So the idea behind this is you can just fill up this whole area with tree if you want. Which looks kind of weird next to the cliff. It doesn't really make that much sense, but that's the gist of it. You can go through and say, okay, here's my trees. And then what you do to finish that off to make it look good, because that looks kind of weird with half a tree and another half a tree, is you actually use this other one over here. So I would use just the left side of it for here, and then click there, and just kind of match it up to where the tree actually is, and then go along the bottom too and do the same thing. Click here, click there, and you can click here, and it's okay that it goes off the canvas area of the screen. And then you can see, and then you can make a little forest under a repeating pattern like that. It's good when you have big spaces that you want to fill in a forest area or whatever, that you just want to have it be like, oh, there's a bunch of trees and the player can't go there, but they can see it or whatever. So it works pretty well that way. But yeah, that's just to show you how that works. It's some people don't really care for it. Some people do. You can also just do like individual trees. You can just kind of put a decent amount of them there. Just kind of stagger them a little bit. Maybe you could put one there if you wanted. And it's not quite as... Actually, that's a little too close to the other one. And you can also do this too. If you put one kind of... And this takes a little bit of practice. Like if you put one right next to here, see it kind of like overlaps the other tree, and that doesn't really work that great. But if you do kind of like at a diagonal a little bit with their offset, then they can kind of work pretty good. And it makes it kind of like it did when we were looking at the repeating pattern over here. But just to give you an idea, we don't need that many trees over here though. So we'll actually just put like one more, maybe right there is good. Yeah, that looks good. Okay, so what I did sneakily here was I put this tree here, and like I was talking about earlier about trying to block the player from being able to move there. So and we'll talk about the passability and stuff later for maps, but having this tree here makes it so the player cannot move on these squares right here, so they won't be able to walk like this. They would have to go around, and they can go behind the back of the tree. so that's not so big of a deal. But it's just another thing to help further, point them to like, hey, look, go over here where this, path leads you, and don't worry about all this stuff up here. But again, it's one of those things where you can choose to cover this all up if you really want. Like you can use a fence or water. You could do whatever you want, and you could force the player to only have literal spaces to go, or you can just kind of suggest it, like, hey, go here, and even though these spaces are open and you can walk over there, you're not going to be able to go to the next area until you go over to here. So entirely up to you how you want to do it. Let's see, I'm just trying to see what else some of the maps. So here we got a bunch of snow stuff. I was trying to see what other things would be good to put down here. One common thing to use is like a rock. That's another thing. I think we'll just put a rock right here. And so that's another thing that will, you can put a rock up maybe right here. That's another thing that will kind of deter the player, like make it so they can't walk through the rock, so then they'll, it'll guide them here over to this direction. So you can see just by doing some little things how we've got a nice little area coming along here. And you can do other stuff. You can put little bushes and shrubs, and you can use these other kinds of trees. Maybe there's one sitting there on top of the cliff and things like that. Maybe you've got some flowers up here growing on top of those grassy areas, or whatever you want. You can spend days with making maps super nice. I'm not the world's best map creator, but I've got enough practice, and it helps to start with smaller maps like this because you don't have as much space to work with. It gets harder when you have a larger map. Like people want to try to do like really big maps and make them filled with all kinds of stuff, but the more you do that, the harder they are to actually fill in a nice way. So unless you really spend a lot of time on them, but experiment with stuff, play around with it, put whatever you see in here, little odds and ends, and just try to see what you can do with it when you're playing around in here, and you'll be able to make your areas look a little more varied and interesting and more pleasant to look at, and then there's more for the player to be interested in when they are going around. And that's the main thing too, is just to try to make it look, it doesn't have to be the world's best map or anything, but just try to make it look a little bit interesting, visually distinct. So alright, and then on the C column we've got or C tab rather, we've got plenty of other things too. We've got all these stone columns and flags, and a lot of this is for in the towns and stuff too. And here we've got some roofs that we would use when we're making buildings, and we'll get to that sort of thing eventually. But for now, we don't need that for here because it's just like a wilderness area.